Gentlemen, welcome to episode 14. How are you guys doing?
Good, man. Good to see you.
Jeremy,
John, good to see
welcome.
you
And
as
I am
well.
well. Yeah, I'm excited to have our first guest today.
Yes. This is pretty exciting for us because firstly, it's the 14th episode. We're talking about what I think is a pretty important issue, and we also have our first guest. So let me introduce Jeremy officially. So Jeremy is an entrepreneur. He is a venture builder. He's a father. He's a friend. And more importantly, he's doing something which I think is really important. Jeremy, say hi.
Hi. Yeah, great to be with you guys this morning. I'll try to set the bar a bit low as your first guest. We don't want
Yes.
to ruin the rest of the podcast by coming out the gates too strong.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, so Jeremy, we were touching a little bit about the work that you do, and I think I want to give you a chance to introduce it properly, and so that we can do it justice. But in a nutshell, based on the conversations that we've prepared, based on my experience with you, it's related to men's work. It's related to emotional intelligence. But could you give us a quick sort of introduction in terms of the work that you're doing, the reason you're here to talk, what you're here to talk about, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to pick up on that word emotional intelligence,
Mm,
in this case, I'd frame it also as like bodily intelligence. So, we think about intelligence and most immediately our thoughts go to our mind and
mm,
our intellectual intelligence. And then Hardesh, you mentioned emotional intelligence. And I think for me and the work that I've been doing, the path to a deeper emotional intelligence is through the body.
mm,
So the work that I do really focuses on helping men establish a deeper connection into themselves. And when I say themselves, I'm talking specifically about the body. So technically, we'd say it's a somatic based practice,
yeah,
which basically just means it's body focused. So
yeah.
we're working on and teaching other men to feel into their bodies, to connect with their bodies, first with physical sensation, but then delving deeper into emotional sensation. So if you think about
Right.
it, emotion is really the body's expression to a stimulus. And so it's in
Mm,
connecting to the body that we then open up um, what is often there beneath the surface in any case, but we're now building more of a path to experience it and bring it into our conscious awareness.
mm. That's very interesting, and that's a really, really good explanation. Could you maybe touch a little bit on the background? Like, how did you get into this? How did you learn about this, right? And how did this, because this is the first time, I think the first time I heard about it was when I spoke to you and I interacted with
Mm.
you and you showed me. But we'll get into that later. But tell us about the background of this practice.
Yeah, so my own personal journey is what brought me here, really.
Yeah.
And I think I'll make some generalizations and assume that, in the men that I've worked with and the men that have been a part of this journey with me, it's something fairly common for us,
Mm,
where over the course of time, as boys growing up as teenagers, and then into manhood, if you will, to use a very big ambiguous word,
yeah.
where we're taught to try to be very stable and to suppress a lot of our emotions, right? So sadness, boys don't cry,
Mm,
right? If you think about anger, it's aggression and it's dangerous. So these emotions tend to, and this is definitely what happened to me, get cut off. And it really then results in like this disconnection between ourselves and our bodies,
yeah.
and which was really what played out for me. And I didn't even realize that that was the case. I always just felt like I wasn't able to connect with my emotions and
Mm,
didn't know how to get there. So it was something that I've been searching for a long time, and like just trying meditation or different other very intent focused like ceremonies, etc., to try to help like reconnect with something more emotional, reconnect with something more spiritual. I had previous partners who would say like, you never talk about your emotions. And
Mm,
would say like, it's not that I don't want to talk about them, I just don't even feel them, was kind of the space that I was at. So I wanted to talk to a friend of mine who was part of a men's group and did some work with his coach, which really was very, let's say, like advice based and what it means to be a man and how to live like a man. Didn't really like narrow in on what I was looking for and what I needed. Um, and then through another friend who happens to be part of like a different men's group using this particular methodology in Hong Kong, actually, Shan, was talking to him and he said, well, why don't we just like run a session and you can see, just between the two of us, what this might look like. And the very first session, it was immediately, I knew like, okay, this is actually it. And it was very simple, but it was slowing down, getting in touch with, like I mentioned, the physical sensations, with the emotion that then connects you to, the emotion that connects you to, and there's immediately like this sensation of tears, and then along with that came this kind of sadness, but at the same time a sensation of joy. And I think that dichotomy like plays out quite a bit. A lot of philosophy talks about, if how struggle informs the human purpose
mm,
and really shapes us, and you can't appreciate the light without knowing the darkness.
mm,
So it's also like having tamped down sadness and anger and fear for so long, I was also unwittingly tamping down joy and happiness and laughter. Um, there's another instance that I can point to like very clearly where I had a men's group in the morning, and it was like a Friday, um, with a fairly meaningful, again, very body-based experience as part of that session. And then it was just a normal Friday. I think that evening, my wife and I sat down and we just watched TV, and it was nothing seemingly spectacular. But the next day, she was like, wow, yesterday was fantastic. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like all we did was all we did was like sit and watch like something on Netflix or something. And she was like, no, but your energy was just so amazing. And
mm.
so I think in delving into that connection and opening up the possibilities for emotion in general, what we often think about as negative emotion, then really amplifies the possibility for positive emotion as well.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
so much in there that you just shared that's super powerful, and this is super interesting as well. Um, if you don't mind, Sean, I'll just start with this question. Um, you mentioned about, which is something that I resonate with, about how men are taught to be men, how men become men,
Mm.
from boys to actual grown men, and that process, I think it's quite interesting because I don't think there's any deliberate intent by any of our our parents to have us develop in this way. I think it's how they themselves were brought up, right? And I think to a large, if I think about it from my perspective, like I don't think the men in my life even knew, like you said, what emotions they were feeling. Because when you were making that point, I was like, do they even understand how to ask the questions? But in order to ask the questions, you need to be conscious of what's happening and pay attention. And so that to me was one of the many learnings that I got from you, about just how to even approach this, right? To be conscious of the emotions. And do you see that based on the people that you speak to today about what you do? And can we just sort of pick at that a little bit more? Like, why is that the case? And can we also talk about your experience of exploring this with men in the West and men in this
Mm.
part of the world as well?
Yeah, so I think firstly, yeah, I don't think anyone's really done this on purpose, right?
Hmm.
It's not that like our mothers or fathers were like, no, Hardesh and Shan, you can't feel your emotions. We don't want you
Yeah.
to have a rich life experience. It's much more for me, I think, uh, fitting boys into society, right? So if we
Mm.
look at the way our society is structured today, 100 years ago, it was transitioning into needing to be able to stand on an assembly line for hours a day and, put parts together. Today, it's being able to sit at a desk for a lot of us for hours at a time. And if we were actually connected more deeply to our emotional selves and to our body's experience of
Mm.
life, there'd probably be way less people that would actually be happy or content, let's say, doing that. I can't imagine you'd want a bunch of factory workers like really contemplating their body's response to,
Yeah,
or like coal miners, for example, right?
exactly.
Um, so I think that's the path that got us here today, is just the way society and civilization as a whole has evolved, required us to be more docile, to
Mm.
fit more neatly into a cubicle, right? So a very, very metaphorical and literal box.
Yeah.
Um, and then that also required, you think about boys today, and my wife, we have a 9-year-old boy who comes from another marriage of hers, and just makes me like think about what I was like as a kid as well. And like, it's fidgety and you've got lots of energy and you need to be able to run around and get outside, which even from that young age is very difficult to fit into like a school setting. So you're taught to like try to ignore your body telling you that it wants to move and fidget a little bit because it's distracting.
Mm.
Try to ignore, as a child, I think whether a girl or a boy, outbursts of energy and really um, expressing your own needs or desires that may contradict your parents, right? Your parents might want you to go to bed and you want to stay up later, whatever it happens to be. Just being able to express that, you're taught to obey. And oftentimes, in order to obey, the most comfortable thing is quelling your emotions.
Mm.
Um, Many men that I have been on the journey with me have had, a lot of trauma in their lives, which then also a clear defense mechanism is just shutting that down and not experiencing it, which then leaves us with, even if we haven't gone something through like a big trauma,
Mm.
micro traumas where there was, an argument that we couldn't voice our own anger, our own feelings about. So we had to go into like a freeze state. So there's a lot of work that we do around fight, flight, or freeze, which are the three primary responses when your body feels that it's under threat.
Yeah.
And most of the threats that we feel ourselves under today, it's most often, at least not for me in my life, a lion that's like running through the village, or, a jaguar that's hiding in a tree in the jungle.
Yeah.
It's an argument with my partner, or it's,
Yeah.
a disagreement with a colleague at work, and something like that, that then triggers that safety response to then freeze.
Yeah. Do you see a difference in terms of, because I have an opinion on this obviously, but in terms of how willing men are to approach this topic comparatively between the West and Asia?
So I think there is at least more awareness of it.
Yeah.
And when talking about the West here, my experience is going to be much more explicitly framed with the US
Mm.
at this point. So I lived in Europe for a while, but well before I was really on this journey. So can't speak too intelligently about like Europe. So talking about the West will just be really with the US.
Yeah.
There's more awareness of at least what like a men's group might be, and people have some picture and some understanding of what it could be. So even if in their imagination it's a bunch of guys around a campfire singing kumbaya and complaining about their wives, um,
Drinking beer.
there's some, yeah, exactly. There's some root level idea about it. And I think more recently, even this like somatic work has been covered by news outlets where they're showing some of the like breakthrough retreat moments and really talking about this stuff a lot more. So even the aspect of like a men's group where it is more about opening the emotions for men is gaining traction in society as something that people think about and something that men are looking for more and more.
Yeah.
Here in Asia, I guess this can also point to an Australian example because I was talking to a friend, an Aussie, and talking about I've started a men's group in Singapore and just got this blank face, and he's like, "Men's group? Like what is that?" So I think that awareness of men's groups and men's work and men being able to support each other is very, very new and emerging in Asia.
Yeah.
Willingness for men to, I guess, have that self-awareness and delve more deeply into their emotions and how they're feeling is also much fresher. If we think about like the societal context, there and I think Singapore and Hong Kong are two like fantastic examples where society is really structured around the pursuit of money and status.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Pursuit of money and status is really not all that rewarding for the body. So the more that you, at least for me, for my body, I have found that money and status do not like really deeply make me feel great.
Yeah.
When the focus is money and status, it is very intellectually, very head driven, and the body is forgotten.
Mm. Yes. I see that as well. Sean, what are your perspectives from Hong Kong?
Yeah, well, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think especially um, more recently within the last few decades, certainly with Hong Kong, there's just been this explosion of wealth and financial success. And I'm not speaking to this as part of like some propaganda train, but the reality is the economics have stated, how many billionaires have been created within the last few decades. And I think the reality is that when the dust settles, realizing that whatever itch there is doesn't quite get scratched or get quenched, no matter what your bank account says or how many people sing your praises. But I guess, Jeremy, something I was sort of curious to know about, just from your perspective and having done this for as long as you have, what do you think is the common thread in terms of what's starting to trigger an interest in all of this? Because I kind of feel like the last few generations, or certainly the last few decades, we've almost kind of been burying our heads in the sand, so to speak. But then why this not necessarily sudden interest, but I guess more recently um, this increase in being interested in this side of ourselves.
I suspect it's a confluence of a number of factors. So if I think about myself, certainly at some point tied to, middle age and you're watching your kids grow up and you want, more meaningful connections and you're kind of understanding the increased importance of connection beyond a lot of other things. I can also point to some extent towards globalization as well, and we're seeing things from the East that influence the West. So whether it's mindfulness and meditation, whether it's yoga practices, there is also like we think about meditation, and typically people's view of meditation is very head based, I think, and it is like trying to focus and quiet your mind and almost create this empty space. There's another Buddhist tradition which is very somatic focused. And so rather than trying to create this like more empty space in the mind, it's delving very deep into the body and everything that can be felt there as well. So I think kind of the heightened awareness in like mindfulness overall in like some of the Eastern traditions that do focus more along those lines, yoga being a connection to the body, really into the breath if it's done well. And then also really just kind of almost this odd mix that we've got at the moment between social stability and instability, right? So if you think about the three of us, I don't know everybody that well, but I think probably financially relatively stable, pretty easy to secure food. You go down to the grocery store, you pick up a packet of this, pick up a packet of that, you come home, you turn on the gas, you've got heat, you can cook. All of those basic needs are pretty well fulfilled today. So it then also opens up more space around actually contemplating like fulfillment and purpose and like what all these things mean. So it's almost as if it's created a bit more space for spirituality and philosophy. So while a lot of us, if we talk about this day to day, we're not necessarily thinking about it as like philosophy per se. It opens up that conversation, and there's space for that conversation because we're not having this call now and this podcast around like how to get food or how to like get clean drinking water. We've got the space to do this, to connect in this virtual way as well, so that messaging where a certain group starts to think about like men's work and then it ends up on TV and it ends up like Instagram. I can see people who are talking about movement and like connecting with your body through like different movements and things like this that just help this message spread to those that have maybe like a small itch. But then when you get more vocabulary and you see examples of it, that's when you can like get it in and understand how to scratch it.
I love that. Like, I think it makes sense. I think you started all of this with the concept of globalization and how I guess the convergence of philosophies have also kind of warranted a lot of this. And I think certainly we've kind of attested to that in quite a few episodes where with social media and whatnot, it's also kind of helped with broadening perspectives that otherwise would be quite narrow with the with the environment that one lives in. But with social media, we essentially have a window into so many other people's lives, and because of that, we get to start exposing ourselves to a lot more vocabulary, like you said, and philosophies, and I think that's fantastic. I mean, I think 10, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have even been able to have this conversation, in real time. But here we are, and that's I think that's certainly one of the benefits of our modern times. But
I have a
Hardesh,
question.
I was, yeah, you sort of mentioned, because I know you two sort of met each other through one of these programs. I guess, interested to know your take on the experience because I've not
Yeah,
had um, the pleasure yet, but you spoke very highly of
yeah,
being in one of Jeremy's sessions. Can you tell us a bit about that?
yeah. Happy to. And Jeremy, I mean, I hope you'll jump in as well because you had the other perspective as the one who's facilitating the session, right? So I was going through something that I think was quite tough because it came out of left field. And Jeremy is a friend and colleague as well before anything else, right? And someone I really respect. So I mean, I reached out to him just as I would a friend, and he very kindly offered to be there and to make himself available to just sit and be present and listen, hear me vent. um, but after that, because he had mentioned a little bit about the work that he's been doing. So he offered to facilitate a session, like a private session. And so I attended the session, and it was in the afternoon. And I'll do like a high level overview because I don't want to take too much away from the experience for people, because I highly recommend it because I learn a lot from it. And I'll describe the session first. So it started off as it's a guided meditation, sort of getting me to sort of listen to my breath and slowly sort of um, take my attention, which is really scattered, and really focus on the external and bring it back down into the breath and then into my body, right? Um, and Jeremy did a wonderful job just facilitating that transition. And it's very hard to do. If you've ever listened to any meditation app, I highly recommend you actually just trying to attend one of Jeremy's sessions because it was very effective. And what Jeremy did was got me to sort of start paying attention to sensations that I was feeling in my body. And from that sort of exploration, I would say, to try and give voice to it, to try and express what it felt like, right? Um, and what came out of that session was quite surprising for me because, and I'll explain why, because I go through my life trying to make sense of it mentally. I use my thoughts, I try and rationalize it, I try and think my way out of life and through life, right? So that one experience was quite interesting, very interesting for me because as I like to consider myself well read on different philosophies and religions, but I never experienced this other way of connecting with myself. It was when I shared my revelations with Jeremy after that session, what I learned or what came out of that exploration, I was a bit stunned, to be honest, because I didn't even know I could communicate that way. I didn't even know that I could yeah, just relate to myself in that way. It was a new kind of experience for me. And it was so novel that I think I was a little bit shell shocked for a bit, like just trying to digest it and process it. But it's it's very powerful because it was almost Jungian in a way, right? Like Carl Jung, the way he talks about dreams and images and what they mean, and you know the underlying meaning of your dreams and the symbols that arise. So for me, it was quite transformative, and that raised a lot of questions, right? Like, look, have I been just processing and going through my life just using one medium and neglecting all these others because of pure ignorance, because I just didn't know, right? And learning how to be able to just pay more attention to my body, to what's happening in my body, allowed me to explore a different side of my existence, right? Which is a huge thing for me. um, and that opened the door, like, look, are there, what else can I do with this? Where else can I go? What else can I learn about myself? Because this whole thing is about self-awareness fundamentally, right? And and what I really loved about that experience was that it reintroduced me, or actually it introduced me to an aspect of myself that, you know, I wasn't quite aware of, right? Jeremy, anything you want to add on top of that?
Well, I'll just say thank you for the share. Um, it's always nice to hear when, as a facilitator can
Yeah.
help show someone something that they haven't seen or experienced before, or something a bit new. Yeah, no, it feels good to hear. So as you were talking, I was doing my own like little practice of just like focusing on my body, and what you were saying was bringing up, and just how that felt,
Yeah.
which as a facilitator is also part of what we do in a session.
Mm.
So it's this really interesting kind of dual awareness where, as a facilitator, I don't have any specific agenda as to where things are going to go. Really, I'm using, in the case of Hardesh, I'm using Hardesh a little bit as my guide, and then reading what I can, and then guiding him to like just the next step,
Yeah.
depending on which direction he is taking things himself. And in order to do that, there's a lot of my attention is focused, one, on Hardesh, but then two, on my own body. And I really think like there's a lot of intelligence in our bodies, and talking about, intuition, and when you have just like a gut feeling, your body's trying to tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's being able to connect with your own body and what it is trying to tell you, and then having to some extent the confidence to just follow it.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of the direction that these sessions might go in, I'm not only am I not necessarily able to rationalize the choices that I am making or the words that I am saying, I'm explicitly trying not to rationalize them,
Mm.
and really just focusing on that connection between like Hardesh and I on a much deeper, more embodied level, and following like the clues that my body is giving me in the experience. Um, so it's also, I mean, it's funny, like if I think about a normal therapy session, I can imagine that the therapists, enjoy helping people, and it's kind of like, okay, that was, great. Like I'd seen progression. In these sorts of sessions, it's a very focused, embodied experience for me as well. Like I am taking more attention than I would normally to focus not only on Hardesh, but on myself and
Yeah.
on that connection. So it's also a very meaningful experience just for me. And like facilitating our weekly men's group, it's very similar, where that is a block of time where I am completely focused. I'm really trying to be in flow with that group. So, focusing on myself and my own body and what it's telling me, as well as everything that's happening in the group. So even like those things are, yeah, they're very powerful experiences. Like even just talking about it, like it feels like all warm and yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I can attest to
And
that. Like, go
I
ahead.
was going to say these, yeah, sorry, it's just these sessions, how long do they typically last for?
The weekly men's group is about 2 hours.
Okay.
And that's just giving room for like each man to be able to take some of their time, with whatever it is that they might need to process, or like going into their own experience. The one-on-one session about an hour, um, and just really kind of following the thread of where things go.
Cool. And would you say initially these sessions help to kind of teach the person to eventually kind of do it themselves anytime they want, or is part of the benefit that it's a shared experience with other people?
Yeah, I think the initial like learning, and that can help you, let's say, like do it yourself, is just taking the time and the practice to connect with yourself and connect with your body, and have some of the vocabulary that then develops, right? So a lot of guys, when they first start coming to like the men's group, it's they don't have almost the vocabulary to articulate what it is that they're feeling. So then that shared experience, they're hearing, it's almost like how you might expect, a kid to learn a new language, right? Or if you're learning a completely new skill, being in a classroom and you're hearing other people use the vocabulary and use the language to describe their own experience, then you start to pick up on like what some of these new words are, right? Like nobody gets a vocabulary list that they have to go home and study. It's really just in the practice of like, oh, okay, that word seems to resonate with like what I'm feeling right now, or I understand what they're saying. Um, so firstly, it's kind of developing that vocabulary to feed into like a deeper perception of what's going on inside us. And then also learning to just remember to slow down, take a minute, And this can be done at any and all moments of the day, and just feel what it is that your body's feeling and what that might be telling you. So I do this like with big decisions. I try to do this like if my wife and I are having a fight. It's just to slow down and be able to like really have much more of a body-led response to a situation rather than an ego
Mm,
reaction to the situation. And then being in a group, really super, super helpful. For me, and even just in the meditations, I think there's something that is somehow like transmitted or makes it different in some way in a group. There's an energy that we pick up on. Um, so even if it's, one on one, as Hardesh described, but then especially if there's five, eight of us together, there's a much richer experience that is involved there somehow. And I don't know what the mechanism is, but it's very different than if I sit and listen to like a recorded meditation myself.
mm. Yeah, that's something that I've experienced when you facilitated a group session. It's something that it's quite it's talked about quite a bit in in certain schools of thought, right? It's almost like a group mind that develops when everyone's on the same wavelength, on the same
Mm,
vibration, with the same objective. After a while, it's like a group mind, and everyone sort of taps into that, and they can feel it. They walk away feeling it, right? And
yeah,
like you said, it supercharges or it amplifies the effect, right? And no one can quite explain it, but it's certain that they feel it, right?
yeah, yeah. And then just to follow that group there a little bit more, when we do get into, let's say, more emotional talk
Mm,
and like letting those emotions come up, the group that I've been training with, like they will refer to a men's group as like CrossFit for emotions.
mm,
So it's you're going to the gym and you're putting in reps, right? And it's difficult, and sometimes you're going to reach your maximum and you're going to drop the weight, but you've got spotters that are there, right?
yeah,
So it's a safe space. The it's a safe space to practice, right?
yeah,
This is a skill that we're learning, we're deepening, we're continuing to work on, and having just that supportive environment to be able to practice and like sometimes screw up because like, I'm getting like super into like anger and reliving this moment, and it's like this big survival response and just what have you. Having that experience in a safe space and being able to broaden the width of emotion that I'm comfortable with and that my body can handle before I get triggered into some sort of survival response
mm,
is super helpful to then take that back into the real world,
yeah,
right? So we're practicing in a very safe environment. The energy is male, so there's another question around why a men's group, why not like a co-ed group?
exactly.
And it is different. Um, I'm not sure I can very well articulate like how or why or like the mechanics behind it, but it's very different. Like
Yeah,
I definitely believe there are biological differences between men and women, for sure, societal ones as well.
yeah,
Um, but something about establishing like that really safe masculine environment to like practice and learn and support each other is super powerful,
yeah,
right? Bringing these things that we're feeling. So I guess, Sean, to your question again about the group, bringing them out into the world and actually articulating it, it makes it somehow much more real than
mm.
just on your own, thinking about and realizing it.
I have a question that I want to get into, and I feel like this is quite important because a lot of what we try and talk about is really centered on two topics, which is self-awareness and, as a derivative, mental health, right? And as you're talking, and as someone who has had a little bit of experience in this with you, and everything that you're saying resonates really well with Sean and myself. But I can't help but think about all the guys that, I've hung out with throughout my life, right? Sitting in a bar with a beer in hand, like the typical image, right, of how guys bond, which is at a bar with a couple of beers, and in most cases, and I know I'm generalizing, inane, pointless conversations that have to do with money and status, right? Generally, and someone in the last group that we attended basically made that point as well, that when I meet my guy friends, I sometimes walk away thinking, what was the point of that? Like, what did I really accomplish? What did we even talk about? Did we even relate to one another? Do I actually get to know you any better? And right, and that resonates so well with me because I have struggled with that most of my life, where it's come to a point where I deliberately avoid people because I feel like I'm better off. My time is much more productively spent by myself, even if it's me going to a bar or a cafe by myself. Um, and so everything that you're saying, everything that we're talking about really resonates with me. But I want to sort of get your thoughts on to that guy. And it's not just a middle-aged man, but I'm talking even right down to young men, to those men who grow up today watching, you know, content about being the alpha male or the sigma male, who want to emulate Andrew Tate, who want to learn how to be dangerous, as Jordan Peterson recommends, right? To fight, invisible wars. What do you say to them? What do you say to their partners, to their family members who are part of these men's lives, right? Like, can you talk a little bit? I know it's a big ask, but can you talk a little bit about the why, right? Why does this matter to those people?
So, I mean, at least for me, why it matters is a much richer experience of life, right? So broadening the window really of experience. So if you think about if you're going through life with tinted glasses, only seeing like certain shades of color, but then being able to lift those glasses off and see a much more expansive world, a much richer world. And there's a lot of richness in our bodily experience.
Yeah.
So just sitting in bed, like if you can really concentrate on like all of the sensations of, something as simple as what the sheets feel like on your skin, or, in the case of Singapore, not so much a breeze, but the aircon, and cool air, like, tufting your eyebrows a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and it opens up one, like this huge richness of experience, but then also a lot more capacity for resilience,
Mm,
right? So if I think about something like the corporate warrior, or the Jordan Peterson's warrior in the garden,
mm,
um, that resilience that comes from being able to experience those things and be comfortable with them, rather than letting them drive our subconscious. As I think what happens, like these sensations are there whether or not we are connecting to them. And when we're not connecting to them, they are directly driving our subconscious and switching on these survival instincts without us even realizing. So
mm,
you'll go into a reactionary response because you've been like triggered about something with no like clear understanding of what's going on. And it's then just the survival instinct that is taken over and driving your behavior, right? I think we've
yeah.
all had those moments where it's like, this is totally not the thing to say. This is totally like going to damage this relationship, but I say it um, because like it's some like subconscious thing that's taken over and is in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
There's an image, and I can't take credit for it, and I don't remember the name of the author, but he describes our subconscious as being like an elephant, right?
Mm,
And our conscious mind is the, let's say, driver, the rider on the elephant. And our subconscious mind is old. It's been evolving for millions of years. It's super energy efficient. Our conscious mind is relatively young,
Mm.
and requires a lot of energy. So when everything's going well, yeah, the driver can, like, I don't know, they pull the elephant's left ear, the elephant goes left, whatever it is, he has some level of control. But as soon as like the elephant's hungry or the elephant sees a mouse and gets scared, the driver has no control whatsoever. It's all being driven by the elephant.
Mm.
And with a lot of this work, and like I talk about, CrossFit and putting in the reps, if we look at like parasympathetic and sympathetic, like nervous system responses, so without going into like technical detail, there's a certain level of like stimulus that each of us are comfortable with. And it fits into like this window where like right here, we're kind of happy. Here, we're bored and understimulated. Here, fight, flight, or freeze instincts kick in. And so a lot of this work and practicing and like really feeling into the body, we're stretching that window of tolerance so that it takes more stimulus to actually kick us into those survival responses. So when you talk about like resilience, whether it's with a client, whether it's with your spouse or your partner, whether it's with your kids, whether it's just like that person that's walking like diagonally super slowly in front of you and getting in the way, and like, why is this so upsetting? um these are these are all moments where like just that resilience of being able to like
Yeah.
slow down, feel into, and just recognize what you're actually feeling lets that energy flow through and move around a little bit, and doesn't makes it like a little bit more difficult for it to take over in the driver's seat.
Mm.
um So I mean, for the guys, at the bar, and there's absolutely a time for that as well.
Yeah.
Not all life needs to be a teachable moment where we're super embodied and super connected. Like sometimes it's fun to go have too many beers and
Yeah.
just like let loose a bit, right?
Yeah.
Um, but there's opportunity in that for us as well to have some leadership.
Mm.
Um, so one of my mentors in this work talked about vulnerability times time equals connection. So the more vulnerable you can be over a longer period of time, the deeper your connection with people is.
Mm.
So there's also room, even at those, pub drinking sessions, for men to be vulnerable, to be a little bit of a leader, in showing that this is okay and this is part of who you are. So talking about like the emotional experiences, talking about, those things that maybe initially like just end up with raised eyebrows and the conversation being steered back to the football score.
Yeah.
Um, Slowly over time, there are going to be bites, right? So when I first started talking about this work in Singapore and looking to set up a men's group here, um, it's just conversations with guys I knew, right? Who
Mm.
previously it would have been like, let's hang out. Okay, let's go to the bar and like have a few drinks and like, but actually sitting and starting to talk about like men's work and the men's group, even before I really knew what it was. Um, you get like, oh, the eyebrows raised. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And like really, once you start to talk about it, I think it opens up a lot of doors that
Yeah.
might not have been apparent to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. Very powerful. I have two things I want to say. Number one, um, just that idea of knowing that you can reach out to a fellow guy friend and just hang out without having to get shit faced. But you can that interaction can actually be super productive in the sense that it's you get to be vulnerable with one another. You get to
Mm.
connect with yourself more, and you're actually there for each other, but you're also there for yourself. So you actually walk away with so much from that, interaction, right? And that to me is it's quite profound for someone who's grown up with this sort of set or limited menu of how men are supposed to interact, right? So that's another thing that I got away from this. What about you, Sean? You're absorbing everything that it's happening over here. How are you feeling about what Jeremy just shared about how what men at the bars, a little quote, can take away.
Yeah, no, I love that. Like I love what you said, Jeremy, about vulnerability times
Yeah,
time equals connection. I think if these types of things came more naturally, um, we'd certainly have deeper connections with one another. I think I also saw some parallels with what you said, just in terms of when Hardesh and I first started this podcast. Certainly the first few episodes, I found a lot of my male friends in particular were reaching out to me separately, and I was suddenly having these incredibly deep and meaningful conversations with people that I'd known for years, and we just hang out, and I always thought that I had a pretty close connection with a lot of them, and I think actually just by saying what we said in the first few episodes and them listening to it, and them saying, hey, some of the things that you guys said actually kind of resonated with me in a way that I can't quite describe, in the sense that there were things that you guys said that I had felt before, but never really understood how to put into words. And so I think the more we kind of expose ourselves to these concepts and ways of thinking, I think is certainly, like you said, just broadening our perspectives and ability to live this life more fully. And
yeah.
certainly we'd want that for
Well
everyone.
said. Well said, man. Well said. Jeremy, can I ask you to, because I know, I consider myself part of your part of the initiative in Singapore. But for others like me, who are at least curious to learn more, and they want to really dig into this and sort of speak to someone, they want to read about something, they want to know where they can go and find more information. Or if they want to be a part of this, right? What can they do, and who can they go to? Where can they learn more?
So first up, I think definitely me.
Yeah,
So especially if you are here in Asia, and
yeah,
even if you're not, I can help point you to people that are like closer.
yeah,
But like you said, I've started a men's group here in
yeah,
Singapore, and really looking to, I guess, get this work to more men.
yeah,
Um, so look for me. You can find me most easily, especially related to this work, so just email
yeah,
Jeremy at
yeah.
nextrightstep.co. So
We'll
not
flash it up.
.com, but .co. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'll yeah, actually type it out so that we
yeah,
don't get any
yeah. We'll
spelling
flash it on the
mistakes.
screen. We'll
Right.
make sure we put it on the podcast.
Yeah, so I think anyone that's interested, just reach out, and happy to have a chat, meet up for a coffee if you're hanging in Singapore. Um, I like talking about the work. I like doing it. The men's group especially, I think is really meaningful, and it'd be great to get more men involved.
Yeah, yeah. And just to clarify again, like there are two ways you can get involved, right? Generally, if you're in Singapore, we can participate in the group sessions, or if you want to have individual sessions, they can reach out to you directly as well. Either case, reach out to you
Yeah,
directly, right?
yeah, exactly. Just reach out to me, and I'll try to point you in the right direction.
Awesome, awesome, cool. Any final thoughts, Sean?
I felt seen when Jeremy mentioned the plight of people walking diagonally, because I always thought that that was specifically a Hong Kong trait. But I'm glad to know that that also happens in Singapore. So I appreciate that.
Awesome.
No,
Yeah.
but genuinely, Jeremy, I learned a lot today, and certainly this conversation, I've come away inspired. Like I'll definitely be reaching out to you on the side just to probably arrange my own session
Yeah,
because
awesome, man.
I'm definitely keen to give this a try.
Yeah, yeah, love it, love it. And maybe for your listeners, we do a little meditation session at some point as well to open
Yeah,
up one of your podcasts.
yeah, for sure. Happy to do that. And from me, I think Jeremy, I think you know what I think about what you do. I think you know what I think about you. Um, Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing, a little bit about your work and why you got into it and how you hope to help men um, through this work. I think it's super important. Um, I think men do need this because these kind of solutions, if I call it, or practice, is sorely missing, right? So kudos to you for, I know why you do it, and you're not doing it for any other reason than because you just want to help people. So kudos to you for doing this, and happy to help you in any way you can. We can. So thank you for being here. And yes, good luck with Everyman.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, guys. Yeah, it's been great. Been a good conversation. Good way to start the day.
Yes.
And the conversation has been, I think, fairly deep, and exploring what can be perceived as a lot of very serious topics. But I mean, this is all like really playful as well.
Yes.
And I think like that connection into the body like can really help us be more playful, have more fun, as well as feel angry and sad and scared. So yeah, they're not all teachable moments. Sometimes it's also important just to remember to have a bit of fun and play around with it.
Well said. Well said. All right. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Sean.
All right.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you.
Yeah.